The north is cold and full of whispers.
Before we dive in, check the link in the description if you want exclusive timelines, deeper outcomes, and members-only videos you won't find on YouTube. All on our Patreon. Robert Baratheon won a war, but a war leaves things behind. Debts, secrets, children. 283 AC, the war is over. The dragons are dead. Rhaegar Targaryen lies at the bottom of the Trident, his chest caved in by a warhammer, rubies scattered across the riverbed like the pieces of a dream no one believed in anymore. King's Landing has been sacked. Oberyn Martell is dead. Her children are dead. The Iron Throne belongs to a man who never wanted it as much as he wanted a girl from the north. And that girl is dead too, in a tower in Dorne, surrounded by the blood of the men who died protecting her final secret. Ned Stark rides south through a kingdom still smelling of ash. He rides with 2 men where 7 rode before. He rides with a sword that does not belong to him, and a baby that the world cannot know exists. Every league south is a league through danger. Robert's agents are everywhere. The war has just ended, and the new king's hatred of Targaryens is not quiet or complicated. It is loud, absolute, and already proven in the blood of children smashed against stone floors in the Red Keep, while Tywin Lannister watched and called it necessary. The baby has silver-touched hair, gray eyes open, watching, Lyanna's eyes in a face that carries enough of Rhaegar to be a death sentence on the open road. Too identifiable to survive the journey north if the wrong man sees it. Too dangerous to carry through a kingdom still drunk on rebellion victory and Targaryen hatred. Ned Stark has made a promise. He is the kind of man who keeps promises even when keeping them costs everything. And this one he already knows will cost him more than anything else in his life. He rides to Starfall. The castle sits above the Torrentine River where it meets the sea, the water below running fast and pale green over pale rock. The Dornish sun is dropping toward the horizon, and the light has turned the color of hammered gold. Gulls circle the towers. The stone of Starfall is ancient and salt-worn, and it carries the quiet that comes to places where great grief has recently arrived and not yet departed. Ned Stark rides through the gates alone. He is blood-stained. He is exhausted in the way that goes deeper than sleep can reach. He has fought the finest knight who ever lived at a nameless tower in the Dornish mountains, and won only because there were 6 of them, and 1 of Arthur Dayne. And even then, 2 of his men are dead, and the victory felt nothing like a victory. He carries the sword Dawn wrapped in cloth across his back. He carries the baby against his chest, wrapped in a blanket that was Lyanna's. That still carries whatever remains of her scent, her warmth, the last physical trace of a woman who burned too bright and too briefly and took too much with her when she went. Ashara Dayne meets him in the courtyard. She knew him once, briefly, at the tourney of Harrenhal 2 years ago, a lifetime ago when there were still tourneys and the world had not yet come apart. She was radiant then in the way of someone who does not yet know what loss is. She is still beautiful now in the way of someone who has learned exactly what it is and decided to survive it anyway. Her eyes are purple dark, a color the Dornish sometimes carry from old blood, and they are red-rimmed. She has been weeping. She knows already what happened at the tower. She knows her brother is not coming home. Neither of them speaks for a moment. The gulls circle, the Torrentine runs below them in the gorge. Ned unwraps Dawn from the cloth and holds it out to her. The blade is pale as milk, pale as moonstone, the ancestral sword of her house carried to war by the finest knight of his generation, and returned now by the man who killed him. Arthur Dayne died with this sword in his hands, defending a baby that the man who killed him is now holding against his chest. Ashara takes the sword. Her hands do not shake. She looks at it for a long time. Then she looks at the bundle against Ned's chest, at the small sounds the bundle makes, at the unmistakable signs of a living child. Her expression does not simplify. It is grief and recognition and something older and harder underneath both. She says, "Come inside." They sit in a room that looks out over the sea. A servant brings wine that neither of them touches. The baby lies between them on a folded blanket, awake now, making small sounds, the gray eyes moving with that unsettling focus that newborns sometimes have, as though they are seeing something the adults cannot. Ned speaks carefully. He has been composing this for days, since the tower, since Lyanna's last words and her last breath and the silence that came after. He tells Ashara the essentials. The child is Lyanna's. The child is Rhaegar's. The child cannot go north, not yet, not safely, because the features are wrong in ways that could get the baby killed at any inn between here and Winterfell if the wrong man asks the right question. Robert has made his position on surviving Targaryens clear. He made it clear in the nursery of the Red Keep with the bodies of 2 children and the blood on Rhaegar Clegane's hands. He needs somewhere safe, Ned says. He needs someone who will love the child not because of what he is or what he represents, but simply because he is a child who deserves to live. Ashara listens to all of it. She is quiet for a long time after he finishes. She looks at the sea through the window the way people look at things they cannot change, acknowledging them without surrendering to them. She says, "I cannot raise him. You know that. I am too visible here, too watched. Arthur's death has made me the subject of questions I cannot afford. A mysterious northern child at Starfall means more questions, and questions lead somewhere I cannot let them lead." She pauses. "But I know someone who can." Oberyn Martell has been at Starfall for 3 days. This is not unusual. The Danes of Starfall are Dornish nobility of the highest order, ancient and respected, and their connections to Sunspear run deep and old. Oberyn moves freely through Dorne's great houses the way he moves through everything, by instinct and appetite and a restlessness that Sunspear cannot contain. He came to grieve Arthur Dayne, his fellow Dornishman, a man he respected in the particular way that fighters respect other fighters, who are genuinely better than they are. He came because grief makes him angry and anger makes him move, and sitting still at Sunspear while his brother Doran calculates and waits and counsels patience is the thing Oberyn Martell does worst in all the world. He has been listening from the corridor. This, too, is characteristic. Oberyn gathers information the way other men gather weapons, constantly and without apology. He enters the room without knocking and looks at Ned Stark with the dark, evaluating eyes of a man who has survived a great deal by reading situations accurately and fast. He looks at the baby on the blanket. He looks at Ashara's face. He performs the calculation in the span of 3 seconds, and he is correct. He says, "Rhaegar's." It is not a question. Ned's hand moves toward a sword that is not there. Old reflex. Danger recognized, response automatic. He forces himself still. Oberyn crosses to the blanket and crouches down and looks at the child. He is not tender about it. He is assessing, cataloging, measuring the way he measures everything he might one day need to understand completely. The gray eyes look back at him. Then he looks at Ned. "You cannot take him north," Oberyn says. "Robert will have him killed." "Yes," Ned says, "and you cannot keep him here at Starfall. Too visible, too many people passing through." "Yes, so you need him to disappear. Into Dorne. I need him to live," Ned says. "That is all I need from this conversation." Oberyn is quiet for a moment. The sea moves outside the window. The gold light deepens toward red, and the shadows in the room lengthen slowly across the floor. "I will take him," Oberyn says. Ned looks at him for a long time. He sees everything he has heard about this man. The reputation that precedes the Red Viper of Dorne through every corner of Westeros, like smoke precedes a fire. The duels, the acknowledged bastard daughters he has fathered across half the world. The years spent with the Second Sons in Essos, fighting for money in other people's wars. The time at the Citadel studying things that most people do not study. Medicine, anatomy, the properties of substances that kill quietly and without obvious trace. He sees a man who is extraordinary and genuinely dangerous, and not obviously suited to raising someone else's child in the kind of careful, patient secrecy that keeping the secret requires. He says, "Why?" Oberyn does not make a speech of it. He says it the way he identified the baby's parentage, flatly, as a statement of fact that he is already fully processed because Tywin Lannister ordered the murder of my sister's children. He gave the order, and Rhaegar Clegane carried it out, and a baby the same age as this one, Rhaegar's son by Elia, was smashed against a wall in the Red Keep while the war was still ending. Rhaenys was 2 years old. She was dragged from under a bed. Elia watched both of her children die before Rhaegar Clegane finished what Tywin had ordered. And Tywin Lannister is alive. He is at Casterly Rock. He is sleeping safely in his own bed, and he will go on sleeping safely for the rest of his life, because there is no one left in the world with the knowledge and the means and the will to make him afraid. He looks at the baby. "I want to change that," Ned says. "The child is not a weapon. Not yet," Oberyn agrees. "He is a baby. But babies become people, and people can choose what they do with what they know. That is my condition," Ned says. He chooses. When he is old enough to understand everything, you tell him everything, his parentage, his blood, what was done to his father's other family and who ordered it. All of it. But what he does with that truth belongs to him. You do not choose his path for him. You do not aim him like a crossbow. He is a child, not a bolt. Oberyn considers this. It costs him something visible, a tightening around the eyes, the weight of 16 years of waiting already pressing down on him before they have even begun. He has spent years watching Tywin Lannister move through the world unpunished. He will spend 16 more watching a child grow old enough to act. That is what he is agreeing to. Agreed, he says. With one condition of my own, Ned waits. I tell him the truth, everything, completely, when he is ready. I do not soften it. I do not protect him from the details. He knows what was done, and he knows who ordered it, and he knows who he is. I will not raise him on comfortable lies. Ned thinks of the lie he is about to ride north and begin building, the bastard story. The invented woman whose name he will never speak, and whose existence he will hint at with careful shame. The Honorable Eddard Stark, who dishonored himself in war and carried the proof of it home. He thinks of what that lie has already cost him, and what it will go on costing him for every year it must hold. Agreed, he says. The baby makes a sound. Both men look at it. He needs a name, Ashara says from the window. Ned leans close. He says something that we cannot hear. A name that Lyanna whispered to him in the tower with the last of her breath. A name she gave her son before she gave him the promise that would define the rest of Ned Stark's life. He says it quietly to Oberyn like a thing being transferred between two hands, a trust passing from one man to another. Oberyn straightens. He looks at the baby for a long moment. His expression moves through something complicated and then settles into something that is not quite peace, but is adjacent to purpose. In Dorne, he says, he will be Jon Sand. Ned Stark rides north before dawn. He does not look back. Looking back is a luxury that the next 15 years of his life cannot accommodate. He has a lie to build and a kingdom to return to, and a king to face and a wife to deceive, and children to raise who will grow up never knowing they have a brother somewhere in the south being raised by the Red Viper of Dorne on. Sunlight and secrets, and the long patience of a man waiting for justice. In the courtyard at Starfall, Oberyn Martell holds a baby against his chest and looks at the gray eyes looking back at him. The eyes are Lyanna Stark's. The fine bones of the face, even now, even this young, are something older and more dangerous. He has seen portraits of Rhaegar Targaryen. He knows what this child will grow toward. You have your mother's eyes, he says quietly. I am told she was extraordinary. The baby watches him with that unsettling newborn focus, taking in everything, giving nothing back. You will be considerably harder to kill than she was, Oberyn tells him. I will make certain of it. He carries the child inside out of the morning wind into the first day of a different life. The water gardens near Sunspear are exactly what their name promises, which makes them remarkable in a world that usually delivers less than it claims. Pale pink marble and blue water, and the sound of children, which is a sound unlike any other, pure and total and without strategy. The pools are fed by underground springs. The gardens bloom all year in the Dornish climate. The children of lords and servants and tradespeople and castle staff all play here together, mixed freely, because Prince Oberyn Martell has decreed it so, and because his decree in this place is simply how the world works, as natural as the water and the marble and the sun. Jon Sand is 4 years old and he is already in the water. He is dark-haired, darker than most coastal Dornish, but not impossibly so. The particular quality of black that sits different from the sun-bleached darkness of the salty Dornish, richer and deeper, but Dorne ranges wide enough in coloring that no one who sees a dark-haired child in the water gardens asks questions about it. His skin is browned quickly in the southern sun, the pale northern complexion he was born with burning first and then settling into something warm and permanent. His eyes are gray, a true cool gray unlike any Dornish brown, and they are always moving, always cataloging, a quality of attention that even at 4 seems excessive for a child, and will only intensify as he ages. He is currently being held underwater by Jon Sand. Tywin is 6 and sees no reason why being 2 years older should not confer unlimited hydraulic authority. Jon resurfaces gasping, and she laughs with the complete abandon of a child who has not yet considered that consequences might one day apply to her. He looks at her. He looks at the water. He looks back at her with those gray eyes, performing a calculation that is extremely advanced for a 4-year-old. He dunks her back without a word. This is the beginning of their relationship, which will last for the rest of both their lives and will never once be simple. It is immediate and total and operates on the logic of equals who have agreed without discussing it that the rules applying to everyone else do not necessarily apply to each other. Oberyn Sand sits on the marble steps at the pool's edge and does not participate. She is 10 and she has decided that seriousness is armor and she wears it constantly. She has been watching Jon Sand for 4 years, since before he could walk, and she has not yet finished deciding what she thinks about him. He is not her brother. He is not quite a stranger. He is something her father brought home and clearly loves, and she has not categorized him to her satisfaction. She says to Nymeria, who is 8 and already reading their father's books and drawing her own conclusions about everything, he's going to be trouble. Nymeria watches Jon drag himself back out of the pool, victorious, hair plastered flat, already looking for the next thing. The kind of trouble that's also right, she says. That's the worst kind. You can't dismiss it. Oberyn says nothing. She stores the observation in the place she stores things she hasn't finished thinking about. In the evenings, Oberyn reads to Jon. Not the stories that adults typically read to children. Not heroes cleaned of their failures, not battles cleaned of their gore, not history cleaned of its consequences. Oberyn reads the real accounts, the Dance of the Dragons, where Targaryen fought Targaryen and the dragons died and the dynasty nearly died with them. The Blackfire rebellions, where legitimacy and loyalty went to war with each other 5 separate times. The wars of the Dornish queens, who held cities against conquerors for generations through a combination of geography and stubbornness, and the willingness to lose everything rather than surrender it. He reads strategy. He reads the accounts of battles won not through courage but through preparation, through intelligence, through knowing your enemy's next 3 moves before they make the first one. Jon listens with an attention that is already characteristic, the still body and the working eyes, and the questions that come in the spaces between paragraphs. At 4 years old, he asks, why did the Targaryens burn so many people if they already won? Oberyn considers the question seriously because Jon's questions always deserve to be considered seriously. Because winning and ruling are different problems, he says. Winning requires that you be more dangerous than your enemy today. Ruling requires that they believe you will remain more dangerous than them indefinitely. The Targaryens used fire to solve the first problem. They never fully solved the second. What's the difference? Fear lasts only as long as the thing people are afraid of remains present. Remove the dragons, and what remains is a family like any other family, with the same weaknesses and the same enemies. The Targaryens forgot that. Jon thinks about this for a moment. Did they deserve to lose? That is the wrong question. What's the right question? What did they do wrong, and how would you have done it differently? Jon is 4 years old. He thinks about it anyway. He comes back 3 days later and says, they should have kept the dragons. Oberyn looks at his ward for a long moment. Yes, he says. That is one answer. There are others. What are the others? We will get to them. This is how the education proceeds. Not in lectures, not in formal sessions, but in the accumulation of questions and answers spread over years, building in Jon a habit of mind that is Oberyn's deepest investment. Not strength, not speed, not even the combat skills that will come later. The habit of asking the right question, the habit of storing information, the habit of understanding that the world is a system, and systems can be understood, and systems that are understood can be changed by people with the patience and the intelligence and the preparation to change them. Prince Oberyn Martell watches from the colonnade. He is at the water gardens regularly, preferring it to Sunspear, the way all careful men prefer places where they can think without the administrative machinery of governance pressing constantly against their attention. He sits with his gout-swollen legs elevated on a cushioned rest, a cup of water at his elbow, his eyes moving across the pools, and the children and always specifically finding Jon Sand. He knows. Of course he knows. Oberyn Martell is the most patient and the most thorough political mind in Dorne, and possibly in Westeros, and his long game already involves Targaryens. He has been building connections across the narrow sea. He has been watching Daenerys and Viserys in exile with the careful attention of a man who intends to use them when the moment arrives. He has his plans. His plans are intricate and long, and require specific pieces to be in specific places. An unplanned Targaryen appearing in his own courtyard, raised by his brother as a weapon for personal justice, is a variable he did not account for and cannot comfortably accommodate. But he is also too intelligent to destroy useful things, simply because they arrived without his permission. He watches Jon argue with Tywin about something in the water, win the argument through the application of logic that Tywin finds annoying and correct, and then immediately extend a hand to help her up the steps. He watches the gray eyes move to Obara, checking, reading her expression, adjusting. He watches a child who is already performing social calculations that most adults manage only approximately. He makes a note. He files it. One afternoon, when Jon is 7, he wanders into the colonnade where Doran is sitting, alone, which is unusual because Jon almost always has at least one sand snake within arm's reach. He looks at the old prince with the directness that is already defining his character and asks, without preamble, "Were the dragons real?" Doran pauses. It is a fraction too long. The pause of a man who knows exactly what he is being asked, and by whom, and why the question from this particular child in this particular courtyard carries a weight that a question about dragons should not carry. "Yes," he says finally, "very real." Where did they go? They died, all of them. The last one was the size of a dog by the end, small enough that people stopped being afraid of it. Things that people stop being afraid of tend to stop being protected. Jon considers this with that expression he has when he is storing something rather than just hearing it. "That seems like the wrong order," he says. "You should protect things more when they become small, not less." Doran looks at his ward's son and thinks, not for the first time, that Oberyn has built something extraordinary in this child, and that extraordinary things in close proximity to the Iron Throne have a historical tendency to create enormous problems. "Why do you ask about dragons?" he says. "I was reading about the Targaryens," Jon says. "I wanted to understand why they lost." Doran is quiet for a moment. "And do you understand it?" "Not yet," Jon says. "But I will." He walks back to the pool. Doran watches him go and reaches for his water and sits with the weight of what he has just seen. This 7-year-old boy with Stark bones and Targaryen blood walking through the water gardens as though the world is a problem he is already committed to solving. "Oberyn," Doran thinks, "you have handed me something I will be managing for the rest of my life." And then, because he is Oberyn Martell, or it will manage everything else for me. The years move through the water gardens the way the Dornish sun moves, slow and total, changing everything by increments too small to notice until the change is already complete. Jon Sand grows. The silver-touched hair of infancy darkens to black. The pale skin permanently bronzes. The gray eyes remain gray, unchangeable, a feature that sits slightly outside any Dornish category. But Dorne is wide and old and contains multitudes, and no one looks at a boy raised from infancy by Oberyn Martell and asks serious questions about his eyes. The cover story Oberyn tells when anyone asks, which is not often because Dorne does not stigmatize bastardy the way the rest of Westeros does, is that Jon's mother was a woman he knew while traveling in the Reach, which explains the paler complexion and the gray eyes and the slightly northern quality of the bone structure without pointing toward the north specifically. No one questions it. Oberyn is known to have fathered children across half the known world. Another Sand is simply another Sand. What people notice instead is the boy himself. By the time Jon is 9, he has the quality that Oberyn has been building in him with every evening of history and every morning of physical conditioning. Not exceptional skill yet, he is 9, but exceptional attention. He watches people the way Oberyn watches opponents in a fight, measuring weight distribution and tells and the gap between what someone is saying and what they mean. He does this unconsciously, automatically, the way other children breathe. It makes adults slightly uneasy without their being able to say exactly why. It makes the sand snakes trust him completely because he notices things about them that they have not told him. And his noticing is never weaponized, never used to wound, only filed and occasionally deployed with devastating accuracy when someone needs to hear something true. Obara has fully decided what she thinks about him by the time he is 8, which is that he is her sparring partner and her competition, and the only person besides her fighting she genuinely respects. This has not made her warmer toward him. If anything, it has made her more demanding, because she respects him, and people you respect are people whose improvement you require. Nymeria has known what she thinks since the first week, which is that Jon Sand is the most interesting person in Dorne, and that interesting people should be watched carefully and kept close. She lends him books. She argues with him about what he reads. She is almost always right, and he almost always concedes this, while somehow emerging from the argument with the better position, a quality she finds simultaneously infuriating and admirable. Tywin simply loves him without qualification or analysis, which is the rarest thing any of them has. The combat training begins properly when Jon is 8 years old. Oberyn starts him on a staff. Not a spear, A staff because the spear comes later, and the staff teaches the same fundamental truths first. Distance is an asset. Movement is an asset. Standing still and absorbing punishment is a choice made by people who lack the imagination to make other choices. The staff is longer than Jon is tall, and for the first month he mostly falls over it. And Oberyn watches this with the patience of a man who has already decided what the end state looks like and is entirely willing to watch the process of arriving there. Jon does not complain about falling. This is noticed. He asks, after the third day of falling, a question that Oberyn has been waiting for. Am I doing it wrong, or is it supposed to be this hard? Both, Oberyn says. You are doing it wrong, which is making it harder than it needs to be. But even done correctly, it would be hard. Everything worth being able to do is hard, and most of it stays hard for longer than you would like. What am I doing wrong? You are fighting the staff. Stop fighting it. Let it be part of you. Your arm extends into it. It does not begin where your hand ends, and then become a separate thing. Jon thinks about this. He picks the staff back up. He falls again, but differently. And Oberyn, who misses nothing, notes the difference. The physical training before the staff is a foundation that Oberyn has already been building for years, without Jon fully understanding it as training. The running, the swimming in the water gardens pools, the climbing that Dornish children do naturally over the old stone walls and terraces of Sunspear, the wrestling with the sand snakes that Obara has been escalating in seriousness since Jon was old enough to make it interesting. Jon at 8 is lean and fast, and has the endurance that comes from growing up in a hot climate that punishes weakness relentlessly. He is not yet strong in the way he will be at 15, but the body that will carry that strength is already being built correctly, from the inside out, on a foundation of stamina and movement rather than bulk. Oberyn trains him every morning, without exception, without the accommodation of mood or weather, or the reasonable protests of a child who would sometimes prefer to do something else. This is not cruelty. Jon will understand this later, will look back on the relentlessness of it, and see that what Oberyn was building was not just capability, but the reflex of consistency. The understanding that skill is not a thing you acquire and store, but a thing you perform every day or it diminishes. The most dangerous fighters in the world are dangerous because they have never stopped training, not because they were born exceptional. Oberyn is exceptional, and he has never stopped training. He has trained every day of his life since he was younger than Jon is now. He trains with his daughters. He trains with household guards who are increasingly nervous about keeping up with him. He trains alone at dawn before the rest of the castle has woken. Jon watches this and absorbs it without being told to absorb it. The lesson is in the observation. When Jon is 10, Oberyn switches him from the staff to the spear. The spear is everything the staff taught him, and then something more. It has a point, which means intent, which means every movement has a terminal consequence that the staff only implied. Oberyn teaches the spear the way he fights with it, from a wide, low stance that distributes weight evenly and makes the fighter extraordinarily difficult to topple. The weapon held 2/3 of the way back to maximize the effective length of the reach, while retaining the ability to shorten it quickly when the distance closes. The first lesson is footwork, and only footwork, for 2 weeks. Jon's instinct, coming from books about northern knights and the Vale style of fighting, is to stand upright and advance. This is the instinct of someone trained to trust armor and strength. Oberyn has seen the books Jon reads. He understands the instinct and he targets it immediately. He says, "Show me how you imagine a knight fights." Jon demonstrates. Upright, direct, the kind of advance that would look honorable and formidable in a tournament. Oberyn sidesteps it in a single movement and puts Jon on his back in under 2 seconds. "Get up," he says. Jon gets up. Again. Jon tries again, aware now that the direct approach is wrong, but not yet knowing what right looks like. He attempts to angle the approach. Oberyn sidesteps and puts him on his back again. 6 times, the same result each time. Jon lies on the training ground looking at the Dornish sky, and does not express frustration, which Oberyn has been waiting for, either the frustration or the absence of it, because both things tell him something important. The absence tells him that Jon is processing rather than reacting, which is the only useful response to repeated failure. Oberyn crouches beside him. "You fight like someone who wants to be seen being brave," he says. "I am going to teach you to fight like someone who wants to win." These are not the same thing. In a tournament, they are almost the same thing, because a tournament has rules that protect both fighters from the consequences of being wrong. In a real fight, being wrong once is sometimes all it takes. Everything I teach you from this moment is about being wrong as rarely as possible, and about surviving the moments when you are wrong, despite everything. Jon looks at him. What's the difference between brave and winning? Brave means you are willing to face the danger. Winning means you have already thought about where the danger is before it arrives, and you have positioned yourself so that it arrives where you want it to rather than where it chooses. Brave is necessary. It is not sufficient. Understand? Jon says, yes. Then, after a pause, show me the footwork again, slowly this time. Oberyn shows him, slowly, and then again, and then at half speed, and then at 3/4, and then Jon tries it and falls again, but the fall is different, and they both know the difference matters. They train every morning. The footwork becomes automatic over months, the wide, low stance becoming the position Jon's body finds without thinking, the way a river finds the lowest ground. The spear becomes an extension of the arm the way Oberyn described. Not a tool held at the end of the hand, but something continuous with the body, felt rather than controlled. By the time Jon is 11, he is fast enough that the household guards Oberyn occasionally brings in to spar with his children start asking politely if they can be assigned different duties. Oberyn finds this satisfying in the way he finds most evidence of his own correctness satisfying, which is completely and without false modesty. The spear training continues and deepens. Oberyn teaches the feint, which is the heart of the Dornish style. The feint is not deception for its own sake. It is information extraction. You show the opponent something that looks like your intention, and you watch what they do with it. And what they do with it tells you where they are committed. And where they are committed is where they are open. And that opening is where you put the point. Every feint is a question, and every opponent's response is an answer. And the fighter who can read the answers faster than the opponent can ask new questions wins. Jon takes to the feint with a facility that surprises even Oberyn, which is not easily surprised. He has been reading people his entire life, storing their tells and their patterns and the gap between their words and their meanings. The feint in combat is the same operation applied physically. He already knows how to do it. He is simply learning a new language for a skill he has had since childhood. At 12, Oberyn shows him the poison kit. It is a small leather case worn smooth with handling that contains vials of various sizes and a set of tools for the application of their contents to blade surfaces. The variety is considerable. Oberyn has studied at the Citadel, and he has traveled in Essos, and he has accumulated over a lifetime of careful research, a pharmacological knowledge that most maesters would find impressive and that most lords would find deeply alarming. Jon opens the case and looks at it with the expression of someone encountering a category violation. He has been raised on a code that Oberyn has articulated clearly in their years of evening discussions. The code of the prepared fighter, the intelligent fighter. The fighter who wins, rather than merely appears to fight honorably. But this sits at an edge he has not yet crossed. He says, this is cheating. Oberyn says, explain. You win a fight through skill, through preparation and technique. Using poison means you win because of a substance, not because you were better. Oberyn sits down across from his ward. He says, the mountain is 8 feet tall and weighs 30 stone. He does not tire the way normal men tire. He does not feel pain the way normal men feel pain. There are accounts from battles of the mountain continuing to fight with wounds that would have dropped any other man. Your sword cannot reach him before he kills you. Your spear gives you reach, but he is strong enough that if he catches it, he will simply pull you to him. Standing in front of Rhaegar Clegane with only your skill and your technique and your commitment to fighting without poison earns you a grave. Standing in front of Rhaegar Clegane with a poisoned spear tip earns you his death. Jon is quiet. The honor of fighting fairly does not comfort the dead, Oberyn continues, and it does not restore the people he has already killed. Your ethics are your own, and I will not take them from you. But I want you to understand what the cost of a particular kind of ethics can be before you commit to it. Jon looks at the vials. What are they? Oberyn begins to explain them one by one, and this too becomes part of the education, the pharmacology of violence, the medical knowledge acquired at the Citadel turned toward its most practical application. Jon learns which substances produce paralysis and how quickly, which produce unconsciousness and at what concentration, which are fatal and which are merely disabling. He learns the vulnerabilities of the human body not just from the outside, as a fighter learns them, but from the inside, as a healer or a poisoner learns them, the places where the blood runs close to the surface, the joints and gaps in even the heaviest armor, the anatomical reality that every man, regardless of size, is a system of specific weaknesses. He does not immediately accept the poison. He does not reject it either. He stores the knowledge in the place where he stores things he has not finished thinking about, which is a place he has learned to trust because the things he stores there always clarify eventually. When Jon is 13, something shifts in his sparring with Oberyn. He has been improving continuously for years, in the incremental way that continuous training produces, each session marginally better than the last, the progress invisible day to day and obvious across months. Oberyn is 5 years older and has been fighting since she could walk, and she is formidable, genuinely formidable, not in the tournament sense, but in the real sense, in the sense that she would be dangerous to almost anyone in Dorne. Jon begins to win, not consistently, not dominantly, but occasionally and then more often. He wins by the mechanisms Oberyn has built into him, reading Oberyn's weight shifts before she commits to a strike, feinting to extract her response, finding the opening that her response creates. He wins because he is faster than she expects, and because he fights with an economy that Oberyn has spent years drilling into him. No wasted movement, no flourish, nothing that does not serve the immediate purpose. The day he wins cleanly for the first time, Oberyn stops the match. Jon is breathing hard, but not hard enough, which is itself information. He feels the rush of it, the first clean victory against someone he has been losing to for years, and it is intoxicating in a way he did not anticipate, a warmth spreading through him that is pride and satisfaction, and something that wants to show itself. Oberyn says, "You were performing." Jon says, "I won." Against Oberyn, Oberyn says, "I watched the last 3 exchanges. You were showing her something. There is a difference, and the difference will kill you." Jon is quiet. Against Oberyn, those 3 extra movements are the 3 moments she recovers her balance and finds a counter. Against Gregor Clegane, those 3 extra movements are the 3 moments he caves your skull in. I am not training you to win against the people in this courtyard. I am training you to survive the people you will meet in the world, and the world does not grade on style. He does not say this with harshness. It is simply a fact, delivered the way Oberyn delivers most facts, precisely and without cushioning. Because cushioning facts is a way of lying to people, and Oberyn does not lie to people he respects. Jon nods once. He picks the spear back up. He says, "Again." They spar again, and the performance is gone from his movement, replaced by something colder and more functional. And Oberyn, watching, thinks that this is the clearest evidence yet that the foundation is solid. The boy can receive a correction and implement it immediately without ego intervening. That is rarer than physical talent. That is the thing that separates fighters who are dangerous from fighters who are exceptional. At 14, Jon Sand spars with Oberyn at full speed for the first time. Not a demonstration, not a calibrated exercise with Oberyn holding back. Full speed with the intent that Oberyn brings to everything he does with a spear, which is total and without mercy. The understanding is that neither of them will land a killing strike, but neither of them will avoid the ones they can make. This is the test that Oberyn has been building toward for 6 years of morning sessions. They move across the training ground in the early Dornish dawn, the light still gray and cool, the heat of the day not yet arrived. Oberyn moves the way water moves, finding the paths of least resistance, never committing until the commitment is already won, the spear an extension of his intent. Jon matches him, not perfectly, not yet, but he matches the speed, finds the patterns, feints correctly, and reads Oberyn's feints with an accuracy that 10 years ago would have seemed impossible in a boy this age. He cannot quite close the gap that Oberyn's decades of experience create. The older man is simply too fast, too layered in deception, too many moves ahead. But he almost lands a strike that would have mattered. He almost finds the gap, the one that Oberyn has been hiding behind, a feint on his left that he has been using on and off all morning. And Jon reads it, angles correctly, extends toward it, and Oberyn catches his wrist a half-second before the point would have connected. Oberyn holds the wrist. He looks at his ward. Jon is breathing hard now, genuinely hard, the first time in the session he has breathed hard. Something passes between them in the gray morning light, something that does not require words and does not get them. Almost, Oberyn says. Jon looks at him with those gray eyes that have his mother's steadiness and his father's something, some quality that goes deeper than expression, a gravity that the face contains without performing. Next time, Jon says. Oberyn releases his wrist. He steps back. He is not smiling because smiling would reduce the moment to something smaller than it is. He simply nods, once the way he nods at things that are correct. They train again the following morning. And the morning after that, and every morning after that, without exception, without negotiation, because this is what they are, and this is what they have always been. And the world outside Dorne is waiting, and it does not know yet what is coming toward it. The Water Gardens do not prepare you for King's Landing. Nothing prepares you for King's Landing. Jon Sand is 15 years old when he rides through the gates of the capital for the first time, and his first thought is that every book he has ever read about this city was written by someone who had either never smelled it or had decided, out of some misguided civic loyalty, not to mention the smell. It hits him before the gates, carried on the wind from the bay. The particular compound of sewage and unwashed bodies and rotting fish, and the kind of accumulated human density that the North and Dorne, with their wide spaces and their clean air, have not prepared his senses for. He does not react visibly. He has been trained not to react visibly to things that are not immediately dangerous. But he notes it, files it alongside everything else he has been filing since they crossed into the Crownlands. The quality of the roads, the condition of the small folk working the fields, the number of gold cloak patrols visible on the approaches to the city, the way the Red Keep rises above everything else on Aegon's high hill like a proclamation in stone that cannot be ignored. The Red Keep is the color of old blood in the afternoon light. 7 massive drums and towers, iron battlements, the physical accumulation of 300 years of Targaryen rule, concentrated into a single structure that sits above the city the way a fist sits above an open hand. Jon looks at it for a long time from the road as they approach. He has looked at it in his mind for years, in the accounts he has read, in the history Oberyn has given him, in the specific knowledge that somewhere in that complex of towers and halls and dungeons is the man who gave the order. Tywin Lannister is not in King's Landing. Oberyn confirmed this before they left Dorne. Tywin is at Casterly Rock, where he has been for years, governing the Westerlands and managing the crown's finances from a distance. His influence over the court operating through Cersei and through the debt that Robert Baratheon owes House Lannister, and through the simple fact that everyone in King's Landing knows that the Lion of the Rock is watching. But his instruments are here. The city he helped build is here, the court he shaped is here, and the hand's tourney has drawn every significant lord and knight in Westeros to the city in this week, which means every piece on the board is in one place, and Oberyn has been looking for exactly this kind of consolidation for a very long time. The official reason for the Dornish party's presence is the tourney. Oberyn Martell is known throughout Westeros as an extraordinary fighter and an unpredictable political presence, and his attendance at a major tourney is not unusual enough to draw specific suspicion. He travels with his daughters, which he does frequently, and with his bastard son, which he also does. And the party that enters King's Landing through the river gate is colorful and loud and occupies exactly as much attention as Oberyn wants it to occupy, which is enough attention to be visible and not enough to be examined closely. Jon rides near the center of the party, between Nymeria and Tywin, wearing Dornish clothing in the Martell colors, his dark hair tied back in the Dornish fashion, his spear in the traveling case on his horse's flank. He looks like what he is supposed to look like, one of Oberyn's many baseborn children, competent and unremarkable, a detail in the larger picture. He watches everything. The city unfolds around them as they move from the gate toward the street of steel and the inn Oberyn has arranged. The scale of it is something the books gave him, but the reality exceeds. Hundreds of thousands of people in a space that forces them together in ways that create a kind of constant low-grade pressure, the energy of too many human intentions competing for too little room. He watches the faces they pass and performs, automatically, the readings he has been performing since childhood. Where is this person's attention? What are they afraid of? What do they want? What are they pretending? The city gives him 1,000 faces in an hour and he reads them all. He watches Oberyn. His father, which is the word Jon uses in his mind without examining it too carefully, because it is accurate in the ways that matter and inaccurate in the ways that would complicate things if examined, rides at the head of the party with the particular quality of relaxed visibility that is Oberyn's default public mode. He is performing the Red Viper for everyone watching. The dangerous, charming, unpredictable Prince of Dorne whose presence in your city is either a great entertainment or a great problem depending on which side of his attention you occupy. The performance is perfect because it is not entirely a performance. The charm is real, the danger is real, the unpredictability, however, is the one thing that is mostly performance. Oberyn has planned every step of this visit with a thoroughness that would surprise anyone who has only ever seen him be spontaneous. Before they left Sunspear, Doran summoned Jon. He did it privately, without Oberyn, which was itself a signal. Jon sat across from the Prince of Dorne in his chair by the window, and Doran looked at him for a long moment before speaking, the way he always looked at things he was about to invest in. As if performing a final assessment, he said, "You are going to King's Landing." Jon said, "Yes, my lord." Doran said, "I want you to understand something about what this visit is and what it is not. It is not an operation. It is not a strike. It is not the beginning of any action. It is reconnaissance. You will observe, you will listen, you will store everything you see and bring it back to Dorne so that it can be added to what we already know. Nothing more than that." Jon said, "I understand. Do you also understand that your father and I have different ideas about what this visit might become, and that I am telling you now, directly, that his ideas are not authorized?" Jon was quiet for a moment. He said, "I understand that too." Doran said, "Good. Then I will tell you one other thing. The people in that city, the ones with power, are very good at reading threats. They have been reading threats for decades because the court is nothing but threats presented in formal clothing. You will encounter people there who are better at reading people than anyone you have met in Dorne. Do not underestimate them because they are northerners or because they live in a city you have never visited." Jon said, "Who specifically should I be careful of?" Doran considered this. He said, "Cersei Lannister, not because she is the most dangerous person in the court, but because she is the most reactive. She does not wait to understand things before she responds to them. She identifies threats by instinct and acts on that identification quickly. If she looks at you and feels something she cannot name, she will act on that feeling before she has words for it. Stay unremarkable." Jon said, "And Ned Stark?" Doran was quiet for a moment. He said, "Lord Stark is now the hand of the king. He will be in that city. He has not seen you since Starfall. He is the one person in King's Landing who might recognize something in your face that cannot be explained by Dornish parentage. Do not seek him out. If he seeks you out, tell me immediately." Jon nodded. He stood to leave. Doran said to his back, "Jon." He turned. Doran said, "Your father has built you into something that I believe is genuinely exceptional. I want you to know that I see that and that I consider it an asset, and that assets are things I take care of. This visit is protected. You are protected. Trust the plan," Jon said. "Which plan, my lord? Yours or his?" Doran's expression did something that was almost a smile. He said, "They are the same plan. We are simply at different points in it." That conversation has stayed with Jon for the entire journey north, turning over in his mind in the spaces between observation, the shape of it shifting slightly each time he examines it from a different angle. Doran's plan involves Targaryens. Jon knows this in the broad strokes, knows that the Prince of Dorne has been looking east across the narrow sea for years, with specific interest. Doran sees something in Jon that fits into that plan somewhere, a piece whose exact position he has not yet revealed. Oberyn's plan is older and simpler and infinitely more personal. Tywin Lannister dies knowing exactly who killed him and why. Jon's plan, to the extent that he has one at 15, is to understand the board before deciding where to stand on it. They reach the inn. Oberyn has paid for the entire building for the week of the tourney, which is the kind of expenditure that only makes sense if you understand that privacy in King's Landing during a major event is worth any price you can name. The party settles. Jon puts his travel bags in his room, a room that is 3 times the size of his room at Sunspear, and smells of tallow candles and the particular mustiness of stone buildings in damp climates, and stands at the window looking at the Red Keep on the hill. Somewhere in that building is the court that made Robert Baratheon king. Somewhere in that building is the iron throne built from 1,000 melted swords by a conqueror who came across the sea with dragons and remade a continent by fire. Somewhere in that building are the Lannisters, Cersei, and Jaime and Joffrey, the golden family who sit at the center of the court's power like a spider at the center of a web. And somewhere in that building, or perhaps in the apartments and great houses of the city that ring it, is Ned Stark, the man who carried Jon from the Tower of Joy and rode north and built a lie and has been carrying both ever since. Jon watches the keep until the light fades, and then he turns away from the window and sharpens his spear in the dark and goes to sleep. The tourney grounds are east of the city walls, a broad, flat expanse of ground that has been transformed over the previous weeks into a temporary city of its own. Pavilions and stables and lists, and the towering galleries built to give the lords and ladies of the realm a clear view of the combat. The scale of it is different from anything Jon has attended in Dorne, where tourneys are smaller and less ceremonial, more focused on actual combat and less on the theater of it. This is theater on a scale that requires genuine infrastructure. 20,000 people will watch the final day of the jousting. The galleries are already a third full when the Dornish party arrives in the morning, and the atmosphere is the particular combination of festival and tension that comes when powerful people who rarely occupy the same space are forced to share one. Oberyn moves through the grounds with the ease of a man entirely comfortable in complicated situations, greeting lords and knights with a combination of charm and pointed wit that keeps people off balance in the way he prefers them. He introduces his daughters selectively and his bastard son not at all in the early hours, letting Jon move through the grounds as an anonymous member of the party, watching. Jon watches. He watches the Lannister contingent first because Doran told him to watch Cersei specifically, and because the Lannisters are impossible to miss, dressed in crimson and gold, grouped together with the particular insularity of a family that trusts no one outside its own blood. Cersei Lannister is exactly as beautiful as her reputation claims, golden-haired and green-eyed in the Lannister way that is almost aggressively perfect. And she moves through the turning grounds with the contained authority of a woman who considers every room she enters to be hers regardless of whose name is on the deed. She is watching everything. Jon notes this. Her eyes move across the crowd continuously with an attention that is not casual, not the general survey of someone enjoying a spectacle, but the focused, systematic scan of someone managing threats. She does not look at Jon specifically. There is no reason for her to look at Jon specifically. He is one Dornish bastard among dozens of visitors. He watches her watch people, and he learns something from the watching. The tells are subtle, far subtler than anyone he has read in Dorne. But they are there. When she identifies something interesting, her eyes do not linger. They move on and come back, a technique that is itself information. She uses the people around her, Jaime when he is nearby, household servants at other times, as secondary observers positioned to watch things she cannot watch directly without drawing attention. She is operating a surveillance network in real time at a tourney, not out of paranoia but out of habit, because this is simply how power is maintained in King's Landing. Jon files all of this and moves on. Joffrey Baratheon is 12 years old and immediately comprehensible. Jon has read cruelty in faces before, has understood it as a thing that originates in fear and expresses itself as dominance. But Joffrey's cruelty has an additional quality that he has not encountered, a pleasure in it that seems genuine and unmediated, as though the boy has never been given any reason to believe that his satisfaction matters less than anyone else's pain. He is beautiful the way Cersei is beautiful, golden and fine-featured, and he holds himself with the absolute certainty of someone who has never been told no in a way that cost them anything. He is watching the tourney from the royal gallery with a boredom that occasionally sharpens into attention when someone is hurt. Jon watches him for 5 minutes and then moves on. Joffrey is not complicated enough to require more attention than that. He is what he appears to be, which is the rarest thing in this city. Robert Baratheon is harder to read. Jon has been preparing himself for this encounter since Oberyn told him, the night before they left Sunspear, that Robert would be at the tourney. He has been told the relevant facts. Robert loved Lyanna Stark. Robert still mourns Lyanna Stark in the way that people mourn things they believe were taken from them, with the particular intensity of grief that never converts to acceptance, because acceptance would require revising the story they have built around the loss. Robert has been drinking heavily for years. Robert is a king who won a throne through war, and has been slowly discovering that winning a throne and governing a kingdom are the different problems that Oberyn once described to Jon in the context of the Targaryens. What Jon is not prepared for is the vitality of him. Even in decline, Robert Baratheon at 35 is a man who was once the most physically imposing fighter of his generation, and still carries that history in the frame of him. The barrel chest, and the heavy shoulders, and the face that is simultaneously dissolving into excess and retaining the structure of what it was. He is loud in the way that people are loud when they have decided that their loudness is a right. He drinks openly and continuously, and laughs at his own observations. He is, Jon thinks, watching from a distance, genuinely charismatic in a way that is entirely unrelated to intelligence or wisdom, the charisma of pure physical presence and the willingness to take up space. He would have been extraordinary 20 years ago, Jon thinks. He would have been the kind of man that other men followed without being asked. Jon watches Robert for a while and then registers, with a specific drop in his stomach, that Robert has entered the competition area near the spear lists where Jon has been assigned for the afternoon's open competition, and that Robert is watching the competitors with the evaluating eye of a man who spent his life in combat. Jon is entered in the open competition under his name, Jon Sand. Oberyn arranged it without fanfare, presented it as a young Dornish fighter, seeking experience, paid the entry fee without drawing attention. The open competition is not the main event of the tourney. The main event is the joust. The open competition runs in parallel, drawing smaller crowds, primarily the lords and knights who prefer real combat to the tournament formalism of the joust. It is, in its way, the more honest event. Jon takes the field for his first bout. His opponent is a reach knight, competent and well-trained, a head taller than Jon and fighting with a tournament spear in the reach style, which is formal and upright and relies on reach and weight. They square off in the marked area, and Jon performs the read he always performs. The quick assessment of weight distribution and foot placement and grip position that tells him the shape of what is coming before it arrives. The reach knight attacks with the straight extension that his style favors, powerful and direct, the kind of strike that works against opponents who absorb it. Jon does not absorb it. He is already moving, the sidestep that Oberyn has drilled into him for 5 years, letting the strike carry past him, and then he is inside the knight's reach, and the bout is effectively over, though it takes another 3 seconds to resolve into the touch that ends it. The small crowd watching applauds politely. Jon returns to the edge of the marked area and notes, without looking directly at him, that Robert Baratheon has stopped moving and is watching with his cup halfway to his mouth. Jon fights 3 more bouts over the course of the afternoon. He wins all of them by the same mechanism, the economy and the speed and the reading that extracts the pattern from the opponent's movement before the opponent is aware they are expressing one. He does not win dramatically. He wins cleanly, which is more unsettling to watch because the opponents never quite understand how the exchange went wrong for them. After the 4th bout, a man beside Robert says something. Robert responds without taking his eyes off the area. The man says something else. Jon is walking back to the Dornish pavilion when he hears the voice. It is the kind of voice that does not require projection because it simply carries, built for large spaces and absolute certainty about its own right to be heard. "Boy, who are you?" Jon turns. Robert Baratheon is 3 feet away, which is closer than Jon expected, the king having crossed the distance between the gallery railing and the competitors' area with a speed that his bulk does not suggest. He is looking at Jon with an expression that Jon has not seen before, a recognition that is not quite recognition, a reaching towards something that is not quite arriving. "Jon Sand," Jon says. "I'm with the Dornish party, your grace. Lord Oberyn is my father." Robert looks at him, not at his clothing or his spear or any of the details that people usually scan in an initial assessment. He looks at his face. Jon holds the look with the stillness Oberyn has built in him, the capacity to be looked at without moving, without the micro-expressions of discomfort or anxiety that people produce when scrutinized and that trained observers read as information. Robert says, "You fight like someone who's been trained seriously." "Thank you, your grace." Not a compliment, a statement. Robert's eyes are still doing the thing they have been doing, that reaching. Where does Oberyn get that footwork? That's not Dornish tournament style. "The Red Viper doesn't fight in tournaments, your grace," Jon says. "He trains for real fighting. He taught me the same way." Robert absorbs this. His gaze moves, finally, from Jon's face, and Jon permits himself one breath of something that is not quite relief. "Come watch the joust from the gallery," Robert says. "I want to know what Oberyn has been teaching the youth of Dorne." "It is not a request," Jon says. "I'm honored, your grace." He goes. Ned Stark sees him first. Jon does not see Ned Stark because he does not know what Ned Stark looks like. Not really. Not beyond the general descriptions Oberyn has given him. Tall, dark-haired, going gray now. The long, stark face that is the face Jon sees in the water when he looks down. He does not know which of the serious, gray-haired northern lords currently occupying the gallery is the man who carried him from the tower. He is watching the joust and watching Robert and performing his secondary read of Cersei and the Lannister household when he becomes aware of someone looking at him from the far end of the gallery with an attention that is different in quality from the ambient regard of the crowd. He locates the source without turning his head fully. Ned Stark is standing at the far end of the gallery, very still, in the way of a man who has just seen something that has activated every survival instinct he possesses, and who is managing those instincts through sheer force of a will that has been forged by 15 years of maintaining a lie under pressure. He is looking at Jon with an expression that, to anyone else in the gallery, would appear to be nothing more than mild interest. To Jon, who has been trained to read the gap between expression and intention, it is a man in crisis. Jon looks at him for 2 seconds and looks away. He keeps his face entirely neutral for the remainder of the afternoon and does not look at Ned Stark again. That evening, Oberyn comes to Jon's room at the inn. He sits down without preamble and says, "Ned Stark saw you." "I know," Jon says. I saw him see me. Oberyn studies his ward. And he is better at containment than I expected, Jon says. No one who wasn't looking for it would have seen his reaction. But the reaction was there. What do you want to do? Jon thinks about Doran's instruction. Observe. Do not act. This is reconnaissance. He thinks about what he saw in Ned Stark's face, not just the recognition, but the fear underneath it. The particular fear of a man who has been carrying a dangerous secret alone for 15 years and has just seen the secret walk into his line of sight carrying a spear. I want to wait, Jon says. If he wants to find me, he knows who to ask. If he comes to the Dornish party, we speak. If he doesn't, we let it go. His job is to protect me. He knows I'm here. If he decides that the best way to protect me is to stay away, then staying away is the right decision, and we should respect it. Oberyn looks at him for a moment, and if he decides the best way to protect you is to tell us to leave, then we have that conversation, Jon says. But I don't think he will. Why? Because he understands the plan better than anyone, Jon says. He made the plan. He knows that what we're doing here is looking, not acting, and he knows that sending us away creates more questions than it answers. Dornish parties don't leave royal tourneys without reason, and reasons draw attention. Oberyn is quiet for a moment. Then he says, Doran will want to know about this. Yes, Jon says. I know. He sleeps well that night, which surprises him slightly and then does not, because he has been trained not to waste energy on things that have not yet happened. And the conversation with Ned Stark has not yet happened and may not happen at all. And the energy spent on anticipating it is energy not spent on the things that are in front of him. In the morning, he trains on the inn's courtyard before anyone else is awake, running through the footwork sequences in the gray pre-dawn quiet, the spear moving through the forms that Oberyn has given him, the movements so thoroughly internalized that they continue without conscious direction, his mind moving independently through everything he stored the previous day, sorting and connecting. Ned Stark comes to the Dornish pavilion on the second day of the tourney. He comes in the late morning, between events, when the grounds have a particular looseness to them. The lords and knights moving between pavilions, conversations happening in the open air, with the ambient noise of the crowd providing cover that a private room cannot. He comes alone, which is itself a decision, because the hand of the king moving alone through a tourney ground is unusual, and the unusualness of it is a message to anyone watching that this visit is not official. Oberyn receives him with the particular warmth he uses for situations where warmth is a weapon. My lord hand, he says, an unexpected pleasure. Lord Oberyn, Ned says. His voice is what Jon has been told to expect. Careful, measured, the voice of a man who thinks about each word before it leaves his mouth, and has been doing this for so long that it now sounds like his natural cadence. Jon is behind Oberyn, standing with Nymeria and one of the household guards, and he watches Ned Stark register his presence and then deliberately not look at him again, holding the conversation with Oberyn with a focus that is itself a performance. They speak about the tourney. They speak about Dornish politics in the abstract way that powerful men speak about each other's politics in public, acknowledging without revealing. Oberyn is perfect, giving nothing away, the charm working continuously, making the conversation feel like pleasure while extracting from it everything it contains. Then Ned says, in the same measured tone without looking at Jon, I would like to speak with your son, if he is willing. Oberyn turns to Jon with an expression that asks the question. Jon says, Of course, my lord. They walk to a corner of the pavilion where the ambient noise is greatest. Jon stands opposite Ned Stark for the first time in his life with full awareness of who they are to each other, and he looks at the man and performs the read he always performs, and finds something he did not expect. Ned Stark is not afraid of him. He was afraid yesterday in that first moment of recognition. He is not afraid now. What is in his face is something older and heavier than fear, something that has been carried for a long time and has settled into the posture and the way the eyes sit in the face, and the quality of attention he brings to this moment. Jon does not have a word for it immediately, and then he does. Grief, Jon thinks. He has been grieving something for 15 years, and he is looking at it now. You look well, Ned says. Quietly, the words beneath the ambient noise. You look tired, Jon says. He does not mean it as a wound. He means it as an observation, and he can see that Ned receives it that way. Being the hand of the king is tiring, Ned says, more than I expected. A pause. The crowd noise fills it. Are you safe here? Ned asks. Yes, Jon says. I'm here as what I appear to be, one of Oberyn's. Ned nods. He is quiet for a moment. Then, I have thought about you, about whether I made the right decision. Jon considers this. He says, Did you? "I don't know," Ned says. "I think I made the only decision that kept you alive. Whether it was right is a different question." Jon looks at him. He has imagined this conversation in different forms over years, since Oberyn told him about the tower, since he understood what Ned Stark sacrificed to carry the secret north. He has imagined anger in it, or gratitude, or some clarifying emotional resolution. What he finds instead is something quieter and more complicated, two people acknowledging a shared history from opposite sides of it. He says, "Oberyn raised me well. Whatever you intended when you handed me to him, the result was better than I think you feared." Ned looks at him for a long moment. Something moves in his face and settles. "Yes," he says. "I can see that." Another pause. Jon says, "I'm not here to act. I want you to know that. Whatever you think this visit is, it isn't that. Not yet. We're here to watch." Ned absorbs this. He says, "Cersei is already watching you." Jon says, "I know. She doesn't know what she's watching for yet," Ned says, "but she will act before she knows. That is her pattern. You need to be more careful than you think you need to be." Jon says, "Thank you." He means it as more than courtesy. Ned nods. He looks at Jon one more time, that look that is grief and recognition and something on the other side of both. Then he turns and walks back into the crowd and becomes the hand of the king again, measured and careful, and carrying everything alone. Jon watches him go and thinks about the weight of 15 years of secret, the daily maintenance of it, the constant monitoring for cracks, the way it must press against everything else in a life. He thinks about what Ned Stark gave up to carry it, not just the reputation, the invented shame of the bastard story, but the ability to be simply honest about any of it, the isolation of a secret that cannot be shared. He turns back to the pavilion and finds Oberyn watching him from across the space. "Well," Oberyn says. When Jon reaches him, "He warned me about Cersei," Jon says. "He confirmed she's already tracking me. Anything else?" Jon thinks about the grief in Ned Stark's face, the long carrying of it. He says, "He's a good man. I think I always knew that, but it's different to see it." Oberyn is quiet for a moment. He says, "Yes, he is. That has always been the problem with Eddard Stark. Good men make bad politicians because they will not do the necessary things." Jon says, "Is being good actually the problem? Or is it that he's been doing the necessary things alone for 15 years and it's breaking him?" Oberyn looks at his ward. He says nothing for a long moment. Then both. Both can be true. The melee is on the third day. Oberyn has entered Jon in the open melee bracket under the same logic that governed the spear competition. Unremarkable entry, no fanfare, a young Dornish fighter building experience. The melee is a larger, more chaotic event than the individual spear bouts. Multiple competitors on the field simultaneously, the combat continuing until one fighter remains or the field judge calls the bout. Blunted weapons, but real technique, real contact, real stakes in terms of what the performance communicates to every significant lord and knight in Westeros who is watching from the galleries. Jon knows, going in, that Jaime Lannister is competing. He has known since Oberyn told him 2 nights ago, sitting in the inn's common room with a cup of wine, his voice carrying the particular quality it has when he is giving information that he wants Jon to receive with full attention. Jaime Lannister, the Kingslayer, the most celebrated swordsman of his generation, the knight who killed the king he swore to protect. He is competing in the melee because he is bored, because he is always bored, because the court does not provide him with sufficient problems for his specific type of intelligence, which is the intelligence of the body, the spatial and kinetic brilliance that makes him extraordinary with a sword, and largely useless in everything else that a man in his position requires. Jon has thought about this for 2 days. He does not want to fight Jaime Lannister. This is not fear. It is strategy, the same strategy that has kept him unremarkable in this city, the same instinct that Doran articulated before they left. But the melee is the melee, and the field is mixed, and he cannot control who he encounters on it without removing himself from competition entirely. And removing himself draws more attention than competing does. He goes in. The melee field is organized chaos, which is to say it is chaos with patterns in it, and Jon, who has been reading patterns his entire life, finds them quickly. The competitors cluster by ability in the first minutes, the weaker fighters drawn to each other by the unconscious recognition that engagement with the stronger ones is likely to end badly, and the stronger ones moving through the field with the evaluating patience of people who understand that the melee rewards endurance and intelligence over raw dominance. Jon moves through the opening minutes with the economy Oberyn has built into him, engaging the opponents who present themselves without seeking out the ones he would have to go to. He wins 3 encounters quickly and cleanly, the spear working through its patterns, and he is repositioning after the 3rd when Jaime Lannister finds him. He finds him the way that exceptional fighters find each other on a melee field, by process of elimination and the recognition of quality. Jaime has been watching Jon for the same reason Jon has been watching Jaime, because watching exceptional things is what exceptional fighters do, and when the two of them end up facing each other in the center of the field, it is less an accident than an inevitability. Jaime looks at him with the particular expression of a man encountering something genuinely interesting for the first time in a while. He has golden hair and green eyes, and the long, clean bones of someone built at the exact intersection of speed and power. And he holds his blunted sword with the ease of a man for whom the weapon is not a thing he carries, but a thing he is. He is 30 years old, and at the precise peak of everything he will ever be physically, which means he is the most dangerous swordsman Jon has ever faced. Jon holds his spear in the low Dornish stance and performs his read. Jaime is right dominant, slight hesitation in the left shoulder from an old injury that never quite resolved, weight distribution even, but with a preference for the forward lean that favors aggressive extension. He is a finisher. He has spent his life being so good that the bouts end before the endurance question becomes relevant, and the one thing that exceptional finishers often carry without knowing it is the assumption that the bout will end quickly. Because it always has. Jon does not intend to let it end quickly. He feints early, low, and obvious, a feint that is designed to be read as a feint, which contains within it a secondary deception that only works if the opponent is good enough to read the first layer. Jaime reads it correctly and smiles, and then finds the second layer arriving from the angle the first feint was pointing away from, and has to move faster than he expected to avoid a clean touch. The smile does not disappear. It changes quality. They engage for what Jon will later estimate as 4 minutes, though it feels both shorter and longer than that. Jaime is everything his reputation claims, and then something beyond it, the speed that is almost insulting in its ease, the sword moving through trajectories that Jon can read but barely respond to in time. Jon does not try to match Jaime's speed. Matching speed is the wrong response to someone faster than you. He manages distance instead, keeping the spear's reach advantage active, preventing Jaime from getting inside it where the sword's shorter response time becomes the decisive factor. The crowd noise grows. Jon is aware of it without attending to it, the peripheral information of a larger context that is not relevant to the immediate problem. What Jon is doing is not trying to win. He is trying to show Jaime something. He is trying to show him that the patterns Jaime relies on, the deep automatic patterns of 30 years of fighting that are so ingrained they operate below conscious decision, can be read and exploited by someone patient enough to watch for them. He is demonstrating, one exchange at a time, that Jaime's certainty about the tempo of the fight is misplaced. When Jaime overcommits on a lunge that Jon has been constructing through 4 exchanges of careful misdirection, extending past his balance point in the way that finishers do when they believe the decisive moment has arrived. Jon is already moving to the angle where the overextension leaves him open. He does not land a killing strike. He takes Jaime's sword hand with a controlled touch that, in a real fight, would have ended the bout entirely. Jaime recovers his balance and steps back and looks at Jon. The field judge calls the touch. The bout is Jon's. Jaime is quiet for 3 seconds, which, from a man who is almost never quiet, is significant. Then he says, "Who trained you, my father?" Jon says. "The Red Viper." Jaime looks at him, really looks at him, in the way that Ned Stark looked at him and in the way that Robert has been looking at him. That reaching quality, the sense of something almost arriving. He says, "You move like someone I've seen before. I can't place it." Jon says, "I'm told that about my footwork sometimes. It's the Dornish style." Jaime shakes his head slightly, not disagreeing, just not quite satisfied. He turns and walks back into the field, and Jon watches him go and permits himself one breath of something that is controlled and cold and has nothing to do with the victory in the melee and everything to do with the man he just watched not quite complete a thought. He knows, Jon thinks. He doesn't know what he knows, but it's there. He exits the field and finds Oberyn waiting at the barrier with an expression that is as close to undisguised pride as the Red Viper permits himself in public, which is to say it is perfectly concealed and Jon can read it completely. "Well," Oberyn says. "Jaime said I move like someone he's seen before," Jon says. Oberyn absorbs this. And Cersei? Jon looks across the grounds to where Cersei Lannister is standing in the gallery, very still. Her golden composure absolutely intact, watching him with the systematic attention of a woman who has just moved something from the category of unremarkable detail into the category of thing requiring immediate action. She's already decided, Jon says. Decided what? That I'm a problem, Jon says. She doesn't know what kind yet, but she's decided. Oberyn looks at Cersei. He looks at Jon. He says quietly, "Then we are past the point where careful is optional. From this moment, you watch your back every moment of every day. You eat nothing that comes from an unfamiliar source. You sleep with the door barred. You tell me immediately if anyone approaches you that you did not expect." Jon says, "I know." "I know you know," Oberyn says. "I want you to hear me say it anyway. She is faster than people expect, and she has been surviving in that court since she was 17 years old. Do not extend her the courtesy of underestimating her." Jon looks at Cersei across the tourney grounds, at the stillness of her, the absolute quality of controlled observation that she maintains in public, and thinks about what Doran told him before they left Sunspear. She identifies threats by instinct and acts on that identification quickly. He says, "How long do we have before she acts?" Oberyn says, "Days, perhaps less." Jon nods. He looks at the red keep on the hill above the city, catching the afternoon light, the color of old blood. He looks at it for a long moment. Then he turns away from it and goes to prepare. The attempt comes on the 4th night. Jon is not asleep when it happens. He has not been sleeping deeply since the first night in King's Landing. The training too thorough for that, the awareness too ingrained, the habit of monitoring that Oberyn built in him, operating continuously beneath whatever rest he manages. He lies in the dark with his eyes closed and his spear within reach, and he listens to the inn the way he has been listening to every space he occupies since Oberyn first taught him that environments communicate if you know how to read them. The inn at night has a sound. He has memorized it over 4 days. The particular creak of the 3rd step on the staircase. The way the window in the corridor outside his room rattles in the north wind that comes off the bay after midnight. The breathing pattern of the household guard Oberyn has positioned in the chair at the end of the passage, a Dornish man named Aleph who takes the 3rd watch and whose rhythm Jon can identify through 2 closed doors. At the point in the night when the city outside has gone to its lowest ebb, past the hour of the late drinkers and before the hour of the early traders, the staircase does not creak. Someone has learned where the creak is and stepped around it. Jon is on his feet before the thought completes itself, spear in his left hand, body against the wall beside the door rather than in the bed, where a visitor expecting a sleeping target would direct their first strike. He breathes through his mouth, shallow and silent, and waits. The door opens inward. 2 men moving with the particular efficiency of people who have done this before, one going immediately left toward the bed, one right to cut off the retreat to the window. They are good. They are operating in silence with the coordination of a practiced pair, and they have a plan that accounts for a sleeping boy and does not account for a boy who is already standing against the wall beside the door with 5 years of full contact spear training and the specific knowledge that this moment was always going to come. The one going right finds Jon before the one going left has finished processing that the bed is empty. Jon does not kill him. This is a decision made before the men entered, in the seconds of waiting, because dead men in an inn room create a category of problem that is different from and larger than the category of problem he is currently managing. He incapacitates him cleanly, the spear reversed, the butt end connecting with the temple at an angle and velocity that Oberyn has calibrated for him precisely. Hard enough to end the encounter, and not hard enough to end the man. The second man turns from the empty bed and finds his partner already on the floor, and Jon already between him and the door, with the spear at the correct extension and the low stance that makes the geometry of the situation immediately clear. The second man is afraid. Jon can see it happen. The moment the calculation completes and the outcome becomes obvious, the way the body registers it before the face does, the weight shifting backward, the grip on the knife tightening reflexively. Jon says quietly in the darkness, "Sit down on the floor and put the knife in front of you, and I will let you breathe until morning." The man sits. The knife goes down. Jon calls for Oberyn through the wall. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. Oberyn is through the door in under a minute, which means he was not sleeping either, which means he expected this on approximately the same timeline Jon did, and positioned himself accordingly. He looks at the man on the floor with his knife in front of him, and the man on the floor unconscious beside the bed, and his expression does not change because he has been waiting for this confirmation for 4 days, and the arrival of confirmation is not a surprise, it is simply the moment when the next phase begins. He crouches in front of the conscious man and opens the leather case he carries and selects one of the smaller vials and shows it to him in the thin moonlight coming through the window. He says, "I am going to ask you one question. The quality of your answer determines whether I use this. Who sent you?" The man looks at the vial. He looks at Oberyn's face. He makes the correct calculation. He says, "A man called Horus. He works for the Queen's household. We were told the boy was a threat to the crown, and that eliminating him would be rewarded." Oberyn says, "What threat? Specifically, what were you told?" The man says, "Only that he was dangerous. That someone in the Dornish party was asking questions they had no business asking, and that the Queen wanted the questions stopped." Oberyn stands. He looks at Jon. Jon says, "She doesn't know what I am. She only knows I'm something." Oberyn says, "That is enough for her. That has always been enough for her." He gives specific instructions to Aleph, who has appeared in the doorway having dealt with whoever was supposed to have been watching the staircase. The two men are removed, quietly, efficiently, in the way that Oberyn manages things he does not want examined by anyone else's logic. They will not be found in a condition that points back to the Dornish party. This is not cruelty. It is maintenance. Jon cleans the butt end of his spear in the dark and stands at the window looking at the city and feels the weight of the shift. 4 days ago, this was reconnaissance. It is not reconnaissance anymore. Cersei Lannister has moved from the category of threat to the category of active problem, and active problems require active responses. And the question of what the correct active response is sits in the room between him and Oberyn like a third presence. He says, "We need to decide what this means." Oberyn says, "It means she knows you exist, not what you are. That she would have acted differently if she knew what you are." Jon says, "How differently?" Oberyn says, "She would not have sent 2 men to an inn. She would have sent the mountain." Jon absorbs this. He says, "Then we have a window, between what she knows and what she suspects." How long does that window stay open? Oberyn says, "Until someone connects you to Ned Stark in a way she can examine, until someone in this city who knew Rhaegar Targaryen looks at your face in good light and finishes the thought that Jaime Lannister started on the melee field." Jon says, "Then we need to move before that happens." Oberyn looks at him. This is the moment he has been building toward, not just in King's Landing, not just in the weeks of planning before they left Sunspear, but in 15 years of mornings in the training yard, and evenings with history and the patient construction of a person capable of standing in exactly this room and exactly this moment and speaking with exactly this clarity. He says, "What do you want to do?" Jon says, "I want to see Ned Stark tonight, before dawn, alone." Oberyn is quiet. Jon says, "You know why." Oberyn says, "Because Ned Stark has been building a case for 15 years without anyone to build it with, and because he is the hand of the king. And because if we are going to move from watching to acting, we need the hand of the king to be moving in the same direction we are moving. And because Ned Stark will never be moving in our direction, unless I go to him directly and make him understand that the window is closing." Oberyn says, "And because he is the closest thing to a father you have besides me, and you want him in the room when the thing happens." Jon does not answer this immediately. Then he says, "That too." Oberyn says, "Go. I will send Aleph to the Tower of the Hand with a message that will bring him to the Godswood before dawn." The Godswood is the safest place in this city for a private conversation. Cersei does not like the old gods. Her people do not watch it the way they watch the rest of the keep. Jon says, "How do you know that?" Oberyn says, "Because I have been in this city twice before, and I watched where her people watch and where they do not watch, and I filed it the way you file everything because I taught you to file things by doing it myself. Go." Jon goes. The Godswood of the Red Keep is small by northern standards, a fragment of the old world preserved inside walls that represent everything that replaced it. A handful of weirwoods and oaks and elms growing in the dark at the heart of the castle. The heart tree is pale and silent, its carved face looking out at the darkness with the expression that all weirwoods have, which is the expression of something that has been watching long enough that watching has become its nature rather than its activity. Jon arrives first and stands near the heart tree and looks at the face carved into it and thinks about what Oberyn told him of the old gods, that the Northerners believe the trees see everything and remember everything, and that the Starks have been confessing to them for thousands of years. He thinks about what it would mean to believe that. He looks at Robert with the eyes of a man whose entire architecture of survival has just been dismantled, and says nothing. because there is nothing to say. Because the thing he has been half knowing was coming for 12 years has finally arrived. Cersei is brought by the household guard. She comes without the physical resistance Jaime offered, which is itself information. She walks with her head up and her green eyes moving across the room with the systematic intelligence she applies to everything, reading the pieces, assembling the picture. When her eyes find Jon, she stops walking for one step and then continues. She looks at him with an expression that is not fear and is not hatred and is not the cold contempt she usually wears like jewelry. It is recognition. The thing she has been feeling since the tourney, the formless threat she could not name, resolving finally into its actual shape. She says, Rhaegar's. Jon says, and Lyanna's. She says, I should have sent the mountain. Oberyn, who has arrived in the room in the interim and is standing to Jon's left, says, yes, you should have. The trial is 3 days later. Ned's insistence on a public proceeding over Robert's preference for immediate execution is the piece of the plan that costs Robert the most. The requirement to perform justice rather than simply exercise it. To stand in front of the realm and demonstrate that what is happening is law rather than the wounded response of a cuckolded king. He agrees to it because Ned is right, and because Jon makes the same argument in the private conversations they have over those 3 days, with a clarity that Robert finds increasingly difficult to dismiss. The throne room is filled to its edges. Every lord in King's Landing, every knight and merchant and courier who can claim any pretext for attendance. The galleries above are packed. This is the trial of a queen for high treason and adultery, and the passing of bastards as legitimate heirs, and the realm has never seen its like. Cersei does not disappoint. She stands in chains in a simple gray dress, with her golden hair loose, and she holds her head up, and her eyes are steady, and when Robert reads the charges, her response is not a denial. It is a reckoning of her own, delivered with the cold precision of a woman who's been managing the consequences of this moment in her mind for 12 years, and has decided that if the end is inevitable, the manner of meeting it belongs to her. She says, yes, I took Jaime to my bed because you took Lyanna to your heart on our wedding night. You called me by her name. You wanted a dead woman, and I was a living one standing in your bed and your court, and your life being insufficient. So yes, I found someone who saw me. And yes, the children are his. And I would do it again. The hall erupts. Robert descends from the Iron Throne and stands in front of Cersei, and in the silence that follows says, you had Jon Arryn murdered. She says, he was going to destroy my children. Robert says, they are not your children to protect through murder. They are Jaime Lannister's bastards presented to me into the realm as my legitimate heirs. That is treason. The murder of my hand is treason. The attempt on Lyanna's son is treason. He steps back. He says the words that the realm needs to hear in the hall that the realm needs to hear them in. And the sentence is death, and the execution is set for dawn. And when Cersei is taken from the hall, she is laughing, not with defeat, but with the specific cold amusement of a woman who has always understood that the game ends this way eventually and has chosen to exit it on her own terms. She dies at dawn. She dies the way she lived, with her head up and her composure intact, and without giving anyone the satisfaction of a visible diminishment. The sword takes her head cleanly, and the realm watches and understands that something fundamental has changed. Tyrion arrives from Casterly Rock 4 days later. He comes alone, which is either extraordinarily brave or extraordinarily calculated, or both, which is the answer that almost always applies to Tyrion Lannister. He comes on a mule. He comes without guards or retinue or any of the visible markers of Lannister power, which is itself the most sophisticated political statement available to him. The deliberate presentation of non-threat to an audience that could interpret anything else as provocation. Robert receives him in the throne room with Ned beside him, and Oberyn and Jon standing to one side. Tyrion looks at Jon across the space of the throne room with those mismatched eyes that are very good at processing complicated situations quickly, and says nothing for a moment. Then he turns to Robert and makes his father's offer. The debt forgiven, 3 million gold dragons. Tywin's neutrality, his banners standing down, his sworn fealty renewed. In exchange, Jaime takes the black rather than the headsman. The children, Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen, fostered in loyal houses. No cruelty, quiet exile, new names, new lives. Robert looks at Ned. Ned looks at Jon. Jon says, the children are innocent of their parents' crimes. They were born of decisions they did not make. They should not be punished for being born. Robert looks at Tyrion. He says, Jaime takes the black. The debt is forgiven. The children are fostered in houses I choose, far from court, treated decently. And Tywin Lannister answers for Elia Martell and her children. Tyrion says, "My father will not accept that condition." Oberyn says from across the room, in a voice that is very quiet and very precise, "Then Tywin Lannister can march 60,000 men against the combined forces of the Crown, the North, the Riverlands, the Vale, the Reach, and Dorne, and we will see which breaks first, the Lannister treasury or the Lannister army." Tyrion looks at Oberyn. He looks at Jon. He looks at the specific combination of these two people standing in the same room as Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon, and understands the geometry of it with the speed that characterizes his particular intelligence. He says, "What does answering for Elia Martell mean, specifically?" Oberyn says, "It means coming to King's Landing. It means standing in this hall in front of the realm and hearing the charges read. It means the lords of Westeros deciding what justice looks like. It means Rhaegar Clegane delivered to Dornish custody, which is the one condition that is not negotiable under any circumstance." Tyrion is quiet for a long moment. Then he says, "I will take these terms to my father." He goes. Tywin Lannister arrives in King's Landing 3 weeks later. He arrives with a small escort, which is what the terms require, and he walks into the Red Keep with the bearing of a man who has spent 40 years being the most powerful person in any room he enters, and is not prepared to surrender that quality even in a room where the power has genuinely transferred. He is old and cold and entirely himself, the Lion of the Rock. And he looks at what has been assembled against him with the clear-eyed assessment of a man who has made a lifetime of correct calculations and is now making one final calculation about what is salvageable. He looks at Oberyn first, 16 years of anticipation between them, the man who gave the order and the man who has been waiting to make the order matter. Oberyn looks back at him with the stillness he usually reserves for the moment before a fight resolves, the absolute patience of a man who has arrived exactly where he intended to arrive. He looks at Jon second. Something moves in Tywin's face, a recognition that is different from Robert's and from Jaime's and from Cersei's, the recognition of a strategist confronting the evidence of a plan that was not as complete as he believed. He looks at Rhaegar's son standing alive in the Red Keep and understands that the child he ordered eliminated at the Tower of Joy was not eliminated and has been in Dorne for 15 years being built into exactly this, the living refutation of his certainty. He says nothing. He straightens slightly. He enters the hall. The proceeding is not a trial in the way that Cersei's was a trial. It is something older and more deliberate. The charges are read by Ned Stark in the capacity of the king's hand. The orders given to Rhaegar Clegane, the specific instructions regarding the children, the specific fate of Elia Martell, they are read without theatrical embellishment, in Ned's careful, measured voice, each charge documented and sourced, and presented as the legal record that it is. Tywin does not deny them. This is the detail that the realm will remember, that Tywin Lannister stood in the throne room of the Red Keep and did not deny what he ordered, because denial would be beneath the dignity he has maintained as the core of his identity. And his identity is the one thing he has not surrendered. He says, "I made decisions that were necessary to end a war and secure a succession. Every lord in this hall has made decisions in war that they would not make in peace. The difference between a decision and a crime is who is writing the history." Oberyn steps forward. He stands in front of Tywin Lannister, and he looks at him, and he says, in the quiet voice that is more dangerous than any volume he could project, "I am writing the history, and I am going to read it to you now." He reads it, every detail, every specific thing that happened to Elia and to Aegon and to Rhaenys in the nursery of the Red Keep, while the city burned. He reads it with the precision of someone who has had 16 years to perfect the account, who has heard every version of it from every source who survived near enough to know it, who has been carrying it as the central fact of his life since the day he learned it. He does not raise his voice. He does not perform grief or anger. He simply says what happened, in full, in the hearing of every lord assembled, in the hearing of the realm. Tywin Lannister listens to it without expression. But he listens. He cannot not listen. The room will not permit anything else. The lords vote. The verdict is what it is. The sentence is delivered not by the headsman, but by Oberyn himself, which is the one dispensation Robert grants at Jon's request, because 16 years of waiting deserves its specific completion, and because the sentence, whatever form it takes, belongs to the man who has been preparing it longest. Oberyn does not rush it. He has earned every moment of it, and he takes every moment. He has been building toward this room since the day he sat in Starfall and looked at a baby with gray eyes and told Ned Stark he would change everything. When it is done, the silence in the hall is the particular silence of something that has been unresolvable for a long time finally resolving. Not peace, exactly. Something more honest than peace, the completion of a debt. Jon stands in the hall after it is over and feels the specific quality of after. The state of having arrived somewhere you have been moving toward for so long that the arrival does not feel the way you expected. He expected relief, or triumph, or the clean emotional resolution of a completed purpose. What he feels is quieter than any of those things and more permanent. He feels the weight of what comes next. Ned finds him as the hall empties. They stand together in the large quiet of the throne room, the Iron Throne behind them, the melted swords of conquered enemies fused into a seat that has demanded more than it has given from every person who has ever sat in it. Ned says, "It is done." Jon says, "Yes." Ned says, "What happens now is yours to decide. There will be pressure from every direction. Every lord in this room is recalculating right now what your existence means for them. Doran will have a position. Robert will have a position. People who have never spoken your name will start speaking it with specific intent. You need to be ready for that." Jon says, "I know." Ned says, "You do not have to sit in that chair. Whatever anyone tells you about duty or destiny or the blood of dragons, you do not have to be anything other than what you choose to be." Jon looks at the Iron Throne for a long time, at the 1,000 melted swords of a conqueror who crossed the sea and remade the world, and whose dynasty ended with a murdered family in a river battle, and a girl in a tower in Dorne who died asking for a promise. He looks at it with the full understanding of what it is. Not a symbol or an inheritance, but a fact. An object, a specific instrument of a specific kind of power with a specific history of what that power costs. He says, "Lyanna Stark died so I could live. Ned Stark spent 15 years lying for me. Oberyn Martell spent 15 years building me into something that could stand in this room. The question of what I do next is the first question I have ever had to answer entirely for myself." He turns away from the throne. He says, "I am going north. I want to see Winterfell. I want to stand in the place where my mother grew up and understand who she was before she was the story that everyone else has been living inside. After that, I will make decisions about what I am. But I need to see where I came from before I decide where I am going." Ned says, "I will come with you if you want that." Jon looks at him, the man who carried him from the tower and built a lie and kept a promise and stood in a room and told the truth at the cost of everything it cost. He says, "I want that." They leave the throne room together. Outside, Oberyn is waiting. He looks at Jon with the expression he has been developing for 15 years. The expression of a man watching the thing he built exceeding the specifications he imagined for it. He says nothing. He does not need to say anything. The look between them contains everything that words would reduce. Jon says, "Come north with us." Oberyn says, "I have a brother to irritate in Dorne. Important work. He cannot be left unmanaged." Jon says, "He managed himself for 15 years while you were managing me." Oberyn says, "Yes, and look at the result. Unacceptable." Jon looks at him, this man who crouched over a baby in Starfall and made a decision based on grief and rage and a specific cold fury about injustice unpunished, and spent 15 years converting that decision into a person capable of standing in the halls of power and making the power answer. This man who is not his father, and is more than a father and is the architect of everything Jon is, that matters. He embraces him. Oberyn stands in the embrace for a moment longer than Oberyn Martell usually stands in anything that requires emotional stillness. He says quietly into Jon's hair, "I told your mother I would tell you she was extraordinary. I have told you. Now you know." Jon says yes. He steps back. He looks at the Red Viper of Dorne, the man who paid every debt that mattered, and then he turns north. The sand snakes see him off from the castle gate. Obara, who has decided after 15 years that her final assessment is that he is exactly as much trouble as she always knew he would be, and that this is the correct amount of trouble, grips his forearm in the warrior's clasp and says nothing because it is sufficient. Nymeria gives him a list of books. Tywin cries without apology and tells him to write and means it. He rides out of King's Landing with Ned Stark at his side, and the city falling away behind him, and the road opening north through the riverlands toward the cold and the gray, and the place where his mother ran with wolves before the world found her. He does not know what he will find at Winterfell. He does not know what he will decide in the coming years, about the Iron Throne and about his name, and about what Aegon Targaryen means in a world that has spent 20 years learning to live without Targaryens. He does not know whether the dragons are truly gone or whether something of them persists in the blood of the last one, running north on a horse through the first cooling air of autumn. What he knows is what Oberyn built in him: the patience, the reading, the habit of asking the right question rather than the comfortable one, the understanding that outcomes matter and that outcomes are made, not found, by people with the preparation and the will and the honesty to make them. He knows who he is. He is Jon Sand, raised on sunlight and secrets in the water gardens of Dorne. He is Aegon Targaryen, last of the dragons, son of a silver prince and a wolf girl who chose each other in a world that said they could not. He is the boy Oberyn Martell refused to let die, and the man that refusal made, and the consequence of a promise made in a tower by a woman who burned too bright and too briefly, and trusted her brother to protect what she left behind. He rides north. The wind comes down from the mountains ahead of him, carrying the first real cold he has ever felt in his life, the cold of the north, his mother's cold, ancient and clean. He breathes it in. He keeps riding. The last dragon had lived among them all along, not in exile across the narrow sea, not in chains, not on a throne, in Dorne, in the water gardens, in the hands of a man who loved his sister and hated injustice and understood that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a dragon. It is a person who has been told the truth and has had 15 years to decide what to do with it. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.